On the rundown for today's Philadelphia Eagles now, we're going to take a look at some Eagles trade targets, specifically players who are currently holding out, who the Philadelphia Eagles could trade for. And this is a list that's obviously very interesting with a couple of players who are seeking new deals, and if they can't come to an agreement on a new deal, could they get dealt? We'll get to that list coming up here in just a moment, but first, let me tell you about this June sub battle between Eagles Now and the Cowboys Report. Two powerhouse channels under the Chat Sports umbrella. Competition breeds excellence. Competition brings the best out of everybody. And right now, we are 35 subs behind the Cowboys Report for new subscribers picked up this month. So here's my sales pitch. If you haven't hit that sub button, do so right now for daily and year-round coverage of the Eagles. All of our content, I aim for it to be informative, entertaining, insightful, thought-provoking. I want you to learn more about the game of football and the Eagles, and we involve you, the viewer, you, the subscriber. Let's take down those damn Dallas Cowboys because, as we know, they're always fraudulent. Trade target number 1 for players who are holding out for other teams across the NFL. Yes, we're going to have some fun here to start the show and revisit reacquiring Haasan Reddick. Look, I know it's unlikely to happen, but Eagles general manager Howie Roseman has the chance to do the funniest thing ever. And look, couples who break up or divorce, sometimes they're able to reconcile. They're able to get on the right page, and sometimes they get back together. It just happened this week with Rory McIlroy and his wife. They filed for divorce. They reconciled. Now they're back together. Could the Philadelphia Eagles do that with Haasan Reddick? Now, as we know, the Birds did trade him away after 2 very productive seasons with the Eagles, traded him to Joe Douglas, who used to be Howie Roseman's running mate in the front office in the New York Jets. So the Jets received Reddick, who had 16 sacks in 2022, 11 last year, and then the Eagles received a 2026 third-round pick. Reddick has not showed up to Jets OTAs. He has had zero communication with head coach Robert Saleh since the trade. And Reddick, understandably so, given the production and what he's done over the last couple of years, is seeking a contract extension with 1 year left on his 3-year, $45 million contract. Now, Haasan Reddick did break his silence on Wednesday, June 12th, as we're recording this, and said, stop believing the foolery y'all see on these social media apps and news outlets running crazy narratives and y'all eating it up. Well, my response to Haasan Reddick is this. You did not show up to mandatory minicamp. You clearly won a new contract. So when you don't show up to mandatory minicamp, people are going to talk about it, just like we're talking about the fact that Aaron Rodgers is overseas on vacation and not at mandatory minicamp. And crazier things have happened in which a player is traded a couple of times during the same offseason. Let's go back to Antonio Brown and that wild 2019 timeline. Shout out to CTESPN. In February, that signaled the end in Pittsburgh. In March, the Bills trade fell through. It looked as though AB was going to go to Buffalo. On March 13th, he's traded to the Raiders. In July, he gets frostbite on his feet. On August 9th, he had the helmet holdout because he wanted to wear a helmet that the NFL wasn't allowing players to wear anymore. And then on September 7th, he was released by the Las Vegas Raiders. You could have never have said that would have happened before that actually happened. It was nuts. And my point here is crazier things have happened. Last 4 years for Haasan Reddick, he's been a very productive player. Double-digit sacks in each of them. In 2020, 12.5 sacks. 2021, 11. He parlayed that into a 3-year deal with Philadelphia in which he was making about $15 million per season. In 2022, he finishes 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting after notching 16 sacks in last year. Not the same production, but the defensive scheme for the Eagles was atrocious. He still notched double-digit sacks. And look at this list. This is elite territory. And Haasan Reddick in an elite category here. Most sacks since 2020. He ranks 4th. That's more than Nick Bosa. And right behind Trey Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, and TJ Watt. Obviously here, the likelihood is low of reacquiring Haasan Reddick. The Eagles should have never traded him in the first place. They'd be much better off as far as at the edge rusher position, because right now you're relying on young players, players who are older like Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham. You're not sure they fit the scheme, or a Bryce Huff who has 1 year of production, or a Nolan Smith who has to take a big leap going into year 2. It'd be great to have a known commodity and Haasan Reddick on this team, but look, Reddick said he wanted to remain with the Eagles. Could you bring him back? 3 more trade targets we're going to go through rapid fire here because they all play the same position, and then we'll break down trade target number 5 for players who are holding out. And I think that 5th player going to be intriguing to a lot of people. Tee Higgins, Brandon Aiyuk, Courtland Sutton. 3 wide receivers here who have held out or are holding out depending on when mandatory minicamp has taken place for their respective teams. And these are 3 really good players here. I'd rank them, Brandon Aiyuk, Tee Higgins, very close together, and then Courtland Sutton, a distant third. Tee Higgins, 42 catches last year in an injury-shortened season for 656 yards, average yards per catch of 15.5. Brandon Aiyuk, second-team All-Pro last year. Great route runner, great footwork, deep threat, everything to his route tree, a really good blocker, 75 catches, more than 1,300 yards, number 2 in the NFL in yards per catch behind Tyreek Hill. And Courtland Sutton, I think, is a little bit overrated. He is not a number 1. The production certainly points to that. And I think he's more so a number 2. He'd be a perfect number 3 for Philadelphia, and obviously a lot more affordable as compared to Higgins and Aiyuk, who could get wide receiver 1 money. Courtland Sutton, 59 catches last year, and the production, it's been somewhat lackluster. As for the projected extensions here, Aiyuk projected to get a 4-year, $124 million contract, which averages about $31 million per year. We'll see if San Francisco is willing to pony up that cash. I don't think they do. Their latest offer, according to reports, is $26 million. The guaranteed money, though, could be the difference. $90 million in guaranteed money, that's a lot of guaranteed cash. And then for Tee Higgins, 4 years, $114 million, average annual value of $28.5 million, and the guaranteed money at $75. So I said that Aiyuk is a little bit better than Tee Higgins. The contract projected extensions, that points to that as well, as far as the value for both of those players. Courtland Sutton, not going to get the money that Aiyuk and Higgins gets, right? But he's seeking a bump from his current $13.5 million cash total and 2 years left on his deal. If I'm the Denver Broncos, I'm telling him to play the remainder of that deal or don't show up and we're going to fine you. Now, we're talking about these players as well because we know that Howie Roseman is aggressive. We know that Howie Roseman is a mover and a shaker. Keep in mind, Philadelphia has nearly $26 million in cap space, $25.7 million that they can use on the roster. Pick a trade for those wide receivers, by the way. Tee Higgins, he wears the number 5. Brandon Aiyuk, he wears the number 11. And Courtland Sutton, number 14. Which one would you rather the Eagles acquire? And then trade target number 5 would come to Philadelphia from the western part of the state. Pittsburgh Steelers. Cam Heyward, really good defensive tackle who's a little bit older, but that has not kept him from being a very productive player in this league. Sat out the first 2 weeks of Steelers OTAs. He is 35, looking to play 3 more years, which takes him to 38. 1 year left on his current contract. I saw him at the Super Bowl each of the last 2 years. This is a mountain of a man. This one a little bit risky because if you acquire him, he is older, and you're not sure if you do pay him how much gas he does have left in the tank. But you look at the numbers and the production over the last 4 years, what I get concerned about, he's coming off a 2023 campaign in which he only played 11 games with 2 sacks. The 2 years before that, though, he was awesome. 10.5 sacks and then 10 sacks. He does a really good job of breaking up passes at the line of scrimmage. He's just a huge player who could dominate the interior of the defensive line. And the Eagles could use some juice at defensive tackle. Vic Fangio going to be running a 3-4 scheme. I think Cam Heyward could be a good fit in that 3-4 scheme. And most pressures since 2019 at defensive tackle. Cam Heyward, 131, Grady Jarrett, 78th, and David Onyemata was 68. It's a lot of pressures. And where that ranks Heyward among all players in the NFL, 4th. It's pretty damn good. So which player would you trade for? We just talked about 5 right here on this show. Drop me a name or a names down below. It can also be a player who we did not talk about here on the show, but that player has to be a holdout. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily and year-round coverage of the EAGLES Eagles. And as always, thank you so much for your support.